My perfect family is not so happy. Perfect marriage. Yes, that's what I had. Or at least, as far as I could tell, that's what it really was. My wife Hilly and I tied the proverbial knot almost 20 years ago. In fact, 20 years was turning in a few weeks on December 10th, and I could honestly say that I couldn't have changed much to make our life together even better. We fought, sure, but making up was always so much nicer. It was just the way we were. In our marriage, there was only one truly black period, and that was in our second year. We both married young. I was 20, and Hilly was only 18, and we had been in love since we were kids, living around the corner from each other. My older brother Bob had married her sister Pam the year before, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Our problem was that the other two had produced their first child within the first year, and we couldn't seem to. We got tested, both of us, even though the doctors told us we were worrying too much and should just let it happen. But the problem was Hilly's parents, or rather her mother, who kept telling us to start a family. Of course, their family was like that. And besides her sister Pam, Hilly had 3 other sisters. Jen, my mother-in-law, was desperate for a son since she couldn't have one herself, and of course Bob and Pam's firstborn was another girl. Blood pressure. The test results turned out to be pretty inconclusive. Hilly's was fine, and mine, my sperm count was a little below normal or something. I didn't understand it. The doctors assured us that it was nothing serious, that everything was fine, that we just had to be patient, and that our first child would decide for himself when he was due. We were patient, but that didn't mean our marriage wasn't under strain. Thankfully, as it turned out, we didn't have to wait too long, and in the 3rd year of our marriage, Hilly gave birth just as the doctor promised. Linda is a beautiful baby girl in every way, but another girl. That at least allayed our fears about whether or not we could have a child, and things calmed down from then on, and our marriage was perfect and kept on going. Undoubtedly, because we were more relaxed, Hilly soon became pregnant again, and finally Tom was born. Yes, a boy, and the whole family was over the moon, lest you get the impression that girl children were neglected or less loved, but the first son in the family just made everything special. Well, I was the one who did it first. I bragged to my older brother, but he only smiled back at me and told me to give him time. Well, he got it, and sure enough, the next year they had their first son, and damned if 8 months later we didn't have another one, whom we named Mike. It's like buses, isn't it? You wait for ages and then a whole bunch of them come at the same time. I guess because we were 2 brothers and 2 sisters, we all lived like one big happy family. Even when Hilly's other sisters got married, they were just drawn to it. It was great for the kids, and of course none of us ever lacked a babysitter when we needed one. As far as I know, other couples were just as happy as Hilly and I were, just enjoying the wonders of simple married life with a loving family around. There were a few other bumps in the road, such as when Bob had an accident at work and I had to be practically strapped in beside him while he was slowly transfused with my blood. He got through it, and of course I was no worse for it, often joking fraternally that we were really blood brothers now. As our 20th anniversary approached, we thought about how to celebrate it. Bob and Pam had celebrated their anniversary the year before, and everyone enjoyed getting together so much that we decided to do about the same thing and booked a private room at a local hotel for a large gathering of family and friends. By then, Linda was a very pretty girl of 17, younger and perhaps even prettier than her mother, with gorgeous dark brown hair and huge green eyes that caught your eye whenever she looked in your direction. They were similarly built, both slender, with nice legs and other virtues that perhaps your father shouldn't dwell on too much. Of course, she had a string of boyfriends, and one or the other was always showing up at the house, but she had a sensible head on her shoulders, so we just went with the flow. Tom, I always thought, was a little more like me, stronger build, and it suited him. He loved rugby as much as Bob and I did at his age, and at nearly 16 he was already playing regularly at halfback in his school's first team. And young Mike, the youngest. Well, he may have been going through a rough patch, and Not being as good at sport as Tom, or for that matter as popular as Linda, poor Mike was going through some bad years. Nothing serious, you understand. He was very smart, probably even smarter than the other two, and did very well in school. Just acted like a perfectly normal, completely uncomprehending teenager. That day, perhaps I should have been more understanding that day. Maybe I should have ignored the mess he left on the dining room table. Maybe I should have just cleaned up after him. But did I? No. "You're not going out until you clean up this mess, Mike," I told him firmly. "I'll do it later," he replied sullenly. "You'll do it now, Mike," I insisted. "Why are you always picking on me?" he shouted back, losing his temper. "I'm not picking on you," I told him sharply. "You're a member of this family, and you'll abide by our rules just like the rest of us." "Who's going to make me?" Mike almost cried, really losing his temper. "I will," I snapped, starting to lose mine. "I'm your father, and you're going to do what I say." "My father is you?" he shouted back. "Are you sure about that?" I stopped suddenly. My next line was still locked in my throat, shocked by what he had just said. "I'm sorry, Dad." Mike jumped up, a pained expression on his face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to say that. I'll straighten it out right away." With those words, he turned away from me and rummaged around the table, picking up books and other things he'd left there. After a few minutes, everything was clean, and he slipped out of the room without another word, leaving me in my own world, wondering if that world was about to collapse on me. The problem, of course, was that Mike was and always had been different from the other two, more teachable, more serious, but less outgoing than his older siblings. I often wondered why he was so different, and even discussed it with Hilly, but she just shrugged and said, "I thought it was just me." Was that what it was? Was I like that? What had prompted Mike to make that remark? If he had just shouted it in anger and walked away, I would have been angry with him, but that would have been the end of it. But he was so quick to apologize and retract the remark. Why? What did he know that I didn't? Oh, shit. I really didn't want to think about the thoughts that were, at that moment, running through my troubled brain. My first reaction was to rush out to find Hilly and demand to know what she'd done. But where would that lead? What would I say? I could hardly just go and accuse her of making love to some other guy behind my back. If she had, she'd just deny it. And if she hadn't, how could she forgive me for doubting her? Besides, that was 16 years ago or more. But does that make a difference? Does it really still go on? My stomach was churning. I wanted to be sick, and I still didn't know if I had any cause for concern. Oh God, what a horrible day this had been. Groups of blood! This is it, I thought. And without further ado, I went into our office and trashed the kids' medical records. Linda, Tom, and Mike. All O+, which, after giving blood to my brother, I knew was the same thing I had. I felt a wave of relief wash over me until it occurred to me that blood types don't tell the whole story. If Mike had been different, then that would be one thing. But the fact that they were all the same type could have just been a coincidence and didn't confirm that he was indeed my birth son. Oh my God, what do we do? DNA? I couldn't believe the thought had occurred to me, and that one careless comment from an angry son had thrown me off balance. I was panicking for no good reason. But when at dinner that night Mike couldn't meet my gaze for the entire meal, I worried again. And when he jumped up from the table without saying a word to anyone, I got really worried. "What happened to Mike?" Hilly asked, also noticing his strange behavior. "I have no idea," I answered, shrugging my shoulders. "Do you kids have any ideas?" They both shook their heads, probably not even noticing anything strange. "Was he upset about something?" I asked, but they only shook their heads. After waiting for the two teenagers to leave the table, I worked up the courage to question my wife a little. "Mike is so different from the other two, Hilly," I began. "Any idea why that might be?" "Oh, let's not repeat the subject, Davy," she replied, getting up to put the dishes away. He's not so different. He's just a little deeper than the other two. End of conversation. Was this done on purpose, or was she genuinely indifferent to it? I really didn't know. DNA. Why not find out about it? And 20 minutes later, I was already Googling on the internet. An hour later, my head was full of facts and figures, but I honestly hadn't gotten much smarter. It wasn't until Monday morning that I found the name of the lab that did the test. It took me almost an hour to find it, and no doubt my secretary would have handled it much faster. But how do you explain to your secretary why you need it? Exactly. That's why I decided to do it myself. They could do it, they had no problem with it, but it was expensive, especially if you wanted results as quickly as I did. But I had to know before I risked my marriage. Was Mike my son or not? When I told them I had 3 children, they offered to send me samples of each of them to be cross-checked along with one of my own. Have you ever tried to get a single hair from your adult children? Not easy, let me tell you. And given that Mike continues to avoid me at every opportunity, it was the most difficult of all. Nevertheless, I got through it, sent them away, and waited. Now all I had to do was wait for the information as to whether Mike was my son. Over the next week, Mike seemed to calm down again, probably relieved that I had not discussed the issue of his outburst with him. We almost got to the point where I felt I could gently broach the subject, but decided it was better to wait to see the results since I had gone down that path. My wife, of course, continued to be her usual loving self, and nothing else seemed to change in our daily routine. I can't say it was the most enthusiastic love these few days, but I wasn't giving up on her. Doubts were gnawing at me from the inside out, and although I tried my best to hide it from Hilly, I just couldn't make love to her without wondering who else could have done it in our 20 years of marriage. One night we had dinner with my brother and his wife, and when he and I were alone together, I almost confessed my concerns to him. He and I were very similar in almost everything, so if someone else was Mike's father, reason told me it couldn't be him. Oh my God! Why did I even think that? Had I already become so paranoid? However, something stopped me. I didn't have to burden him with my doubts, and after all, I was sure he would be there for me if the results turned out to be bad. I remained calm, silent. I was so quiet that Hilly asked me a couple times if I was okay. I'm fine, I told her. I just have a few things on my mind. She looked concerned for a moment but didn't question me. The results came back. I asked for them to be delivered to my office in case Hilly came in before me and opened the letter. I read it with trembling hands, trying to figure out what it all meant. Did this piece of paper really mean the end of my marriage? I read it. As far as I could tell, Mike's results matched mine well, and I relaxed, though I still didn't understand it all. You've probably guessed by now that medical terms are a lot of mumbo-jumbo to me. In fact, the whole report was full of good match and close match, so it felt like it was all a storm in a glass. What a bloody relief! I felt tears come to my eyes and thanked heaven I hadn't told Hilly about my fears. I decided to make it up to her that evening. Maybe take her out to dinner, and then on to... Upon rereading the cover letter, which I hadn't paid much attention to, I saw that the lab wanted me to call them to discuss the results. I guess it was just an excuse to make more money off me, and I wondered if I should bother. Hello, this is Davy Jones, I said when the phone answered. Dr. Hoskins asked me to call him. After giving the woman some recommendations and whatnot, I was eventually connected to the good doctor. Hello, Mr. Jones, he greeted me. Have you had a chance to review the results we sent you? Yes, I answered confidently. If I understand correctly, it seems that my fears about my son Mike were unfounded. Yes, but I'm afraid it's not quite that simple, he blurted out, and the floor seemed to disappear from under my feet as I waited for him to shatter my world. Are you saying he's not my son? I muttered back to him. That's not the point, Mr. Jones, he continued. The odds of him not being your offspring are less than 1,000,000 to 1. I'd bet my entire reputation that he's your real son. So Mike is my real son, I replied with relief. Yes, Mr. Jones. What's the problem then? I continued uncertainly. What else could be wrong? By then I was getting very worried because I had read somewhere that DNA testing could reveal genetic diseases and the like. Was Mike sick? Could either of us have something terrible? What was he going to tell me? These are the other 2 samples you sent, the doctor informed me seriously. The ones from your son's brother and sister? Yes. What about them? I asked, starting to panic. Is there something wrong with one of them? Well, it looks like they're only half-siblings of your youngest son, Mr. Jones. Step-siblings? I hissed at him. What does that mean, doctor? What is half-brothers and sisters? It means, Mr. Jones, he continued, that it's highly unlikely that you're their real father. I dropped the phone, and the next thing I knew I was coming to, with a group of my co-workers around me. Give him some air! I heard someone call out to me as I slowly regained consciousness, fighting for my breath. Are you okay, Davy? Another voice asked, and I nodded my head, trying to get to my feet. They helped me up, and I found myself sitting in my chair while the people behind me muttered about how hot it was in the office and how stressed they all were due to the workload. What a load of crap. If only they knew. They had someone drive me home, telling me to take the day off. I was thankful that when I arrived, the house was empty. Hilly was at her part-time job and the kids were at school. I had to do it. I hated to do it terribly, but I had to. With trembling fingers, I dialed the lab's number again, and in a few moments I was back on the phone with the doctor, apologizing for cutting the connection earlier. I'm sorry, Mr. Jones, he said. I should have warned you beforehand, but we only work with mail, and that's sometimes very difficult. I told him I understood that I was fine, and he went over the test results with me one more time. Mikey was undoubtedly miney. Linda and Tom were unlikely to be my children. But the results said that all the matches were good or close, Doctor, I pleaded. Could there be some mistake? If we only had one sample, he explained carefully, we might well have asked for another sample to check. But with 2 samples, it's almost 100% certainty. These 2 are full brother and sister, but I'm afraid it's unlikely that you're their father. But you said they were close, I repeated, desperately clinging to a thin thread of hope. What does that mean? Do you have a twin, Mr. Jones? He asked cautiously. Or a brother, perhaps? My brother! I exclaimed excitedly. What the hell does he have to do with it? You must draw your own conclusions, Mr. Jones, continued the doctor. If you could get a sample of your brother, we could test it. But I wasn't listening anymore. My little perfect world really abruptly cut off. What to do about it? Did I want to end my marriage? Did I want to end my relationship with my only brother? You can cancel your wife, but you certainly can't cancel your brother. Wouldn't it be better to go on living as if I knew nothing? To continue living a pathetic lie? I couldn't. Anyway, what about Mike? He knew something, that's for sure, but it seemed like the wrong end of the stick. Sure, I would see my son Mike in a different light from then on, but would I love Linda and Tom any less? I couldn't imagine that I would. How could I? They were my children, no matter who created them, and no piece of paper could change that. But what about Hilly? That was the question. What about that cheating asshole? And my asshole brother, for that matter, and Pam, my sister-in-law. What about her? How's she gonna take the news? How will the rest of the family take the news? There were too many questions running through my head. Oh my God, it was all so complicated and I didn't feel ready for the ordeal. I remember walking out the front door and starting to walk down the street, but the next thing I knew I woke up in the hospital with bandages on my arms. I'd fallen in front of a car, drunk out of my mind, but I didn't know that at the time. Davy! Are you okay? I looked around to see who had asked the question, but I was in pain. It hurt like hell. It hit me, and I realized it was my ex-wife talking to me. No, not yet, anyway. She was still my wife. I didn't say anything, at least nothing substantial. I just didn't know what to say. How about in hello, darling? Just found out that the 2 kids aren't mine and that you slept with my brother. Did you have a good day? What's for dinner? Doesn't sound quite right, does it? Anyway, it turned out that my injuries were far from life-threatening, and I was sent home the next day. I couldn't do anything to help myself, though, so I procrastinated while I had to rely on Hilly to help me. This gave me time to think, time to plan. However, the time was wasted, and I still didn't know what to do. But for some reason, Mike and the other 2 kids seemed to be the main problem. Whatever I decided, it had to be in their best interests, even if my interests had to suffer. From now on, Hilly's interests would come last. All I knew was that our 20th wedding anniversary was approaching, and the room for the big dinner had been reserved. By that time, everything would have to be settled. Within a week or so, I had more or less returned to normal, at least physically, and everything seemed to be back to normal while I wondered what to do, except for Mike, who seemed to be in danger of going off the rails and was just the right age to do so. "You'll have to talk to him, Davy," Hilly said late one evening. "I don't know what's wrong with him. He doesn't seem to want to talk to me anymore." "I'll talk to him," I promised. "Do you have any idea what's wrong with him?" she asked. "I do, several," I answered briefly. "Do you want to discuss them with me, Davy?" "Not really," I answered, which discouraged her somewhat. The opportunity presented itself the next day when I caught him alone in his room, and unless he pushed me out of the way, he wouldn't be able to avoid me. "Do you want to talk about what's bothering you, son?" I began softly. He only shook his head. He didn't want to talk. "Maybe it's something to do with that day, Mike." I nudged him. "Oh, about our relationship?" Mike looked at me, and I couldn't help but notice a tear in his eye. Suddenly, he looked older than his tender years. "You don't know Dad, do you?" he challenged me. "I may know more than you think, son," I answered him, trying to keep a smile on my face. "Then why don't you do something about it, Dad?" he whined. "Why do you let them get away with everything?" "Wait a minute." This wasn't going the way I thought it would. "It's not like we're talking about the same thing." "Getting away with what, son? What the hell else could I say?" "You really don't know, Dad," he repeated. "Apparently not, son," I had to admit. "It's Mom and Uncle Tim, Dad," he told me in no more than a whisper. "When you're at work once a month or so, it's a damn shame. Uncle Tim, I'll be damned! Tim was the husband of Anne, another of Hilly's sisters." "Oh, that," I muttered pathetically, not knowing what else to say. "They've been doing it for years, Dad," my offspring informed me. "Linda thinks I'm Tim's son, not yours." At this, he broke down and cried, and I wrapped my arms around him to comfort him. It had been a long time since I had done that, and it surprised me how big and strong my little boy felt. "I can absolutely guarantee you, Mike," I comforted him as I continued to hug him. "You are my son in every way, not Tim's." "How do you know, Daddy?" he sobbed. "How can you be sure?" "I am sure, son," I told him firmly. "Believe me, I'm sure." We chatted for a while longer, and without giving too much away, I convinced him of his fatherhood, and it was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. However, there was no mention of my brother being the father of the other 2 children, and I found that my ideal family was not as happy and content as I had assumed. Both Linda and Tom knew about their mother's affair with their uncle, but, not knowing what to do about it, chose to just turn a blind eye. What a terrible position to put one's own children in. But Tim? Goodness, his wife Anne was the youngest of the 4 sisters, and by far the prettiest of them all. Hilly was attractive enough, but Anne... Another blow was struck at the heart of my so-called perfect marriage to Hilly. A few days later, I took all 3 kids out to dinner and did the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I told them everything I had learned. Everything, for crying out loud. I had no idea how they would react, but they took it okay. Linda cried a little, and Tom sat with his head in his hands. All three of them wanted to go and see their mother right away, but I convinced them to wait, as I had some business to take care of first. All three swore their love and devotion to me and were close to refusing to ever see Hilly again. I, of course, talked them out of it, reminding them that no matter what she did, she was still their mother and had taken excellent care of them all their lives. I spoke of her in terms I didn't really feel, especially when the kids told me their story. Hilly, my loving wife, obviously had a relationship with her son-in-law Tim for a while, but really probably not long enough to be Mike's father. Once a month might have been a big exaggeration too, but honestly, neither of us knew that. The only thing I did know was that the kids were so grateful to be told all of this, and all three of them cried, even Tom when we got together at the end of the evening. I will correct that last statement. All four of us cried. I needed revenge, but in a way that would not cause grief to my children, and yes, I use that term with caution. I mean my children. I thought about it for a long time, but I couldn't come up with any spectacular act of revenge. It just had to be a direct confrontation. At least I had an event where I could do that. December 10th. The family gathered, as a family should. My parents by then had passed away, and Bob and I were fairly late in life. That night at the holiday dinner, there were 39 of us, mostly members of the Hilly family and their families, but there were some of our other friends as well. The dinner was good. At least that's what they told me, and as for me, I could eat cardboard and drink water. It was time for speeches. It has begun. The end? Maybe the beginning. I sweated profusely and took long, deep breaths to calm myself down. What I was about to do was not easy, but it had to be done. Greetings to all our family and friends, I began, and for a few moments continued talking about inconsequential things. And now, let's celebrate 20 years of marriage to my wife Hilly, I finally finished. There are some very interesting and even intimate and personal things about my marriage to my dear wife that I want to tell you all about. A giggle was heard around the big table, and one or two rude comments about our supposed lives. Hilly blushed. They all thought I was joking, but how wrong they were. When the laughter subsided, Linda got up from her seat first and headed for the dining room exit, followed by Tom and then Mike. They didn't say a word to anyone, and the entire table watched their backs in amazement, not realizing what was going on. "You three, get back here!" Hilly shouted angrily, jumping to her feet. "Don't be so rude to your father!" Only Tom replied, turning around to look at his mother for a moment and shaking his head unhappily before joining his brother and sister outside. "Davy," my wife called out to me, "do something. Tell them to come back immediately." "It's all right, honey," I told her very firmly. "They already know what I'm going to say, and since it involves the three of them, maybe it's best if they're not here." Hilly's mouth dropped open in surprise, first from surprise at the way I reacted to her demand, and then from concern, as her mind must have been going over every possible reason for my behavior. "Sit down, Hilly," I told her, my tone leaving no doubt that I was not to be trifled with. "As I was saying," I continued, looking at the people around me, "I've had 20 wonderful years of marriage, a perfect marriage, or so I thought until a couple weeks ago." I paused for effect, and the atmosphere around the table electrified. Some looked puzzled, others were still smiling, expecting a joke. But a few were very concerned, including a few people, which surprised me. "Imagine my surprise," I continued when no one said anything, "to find out that Linda, my beloved Linda, is not actually my own daughter." "Oh my God," Hilly sobbed quietly, covering her face with her hands, the only one who made a sound. "Don't you want to tell everyone who Linda's real father is, Hilly?" I asked her, but she was silent, only sobbing loudly, the only sound breaking the complete silence around me. "Okay then," I continued. Does anyone else want to tell everyone who Linda's father is? Anyone else want to tell everyone who made love to my wife behind my back? No one spoke, and I just stood there, casting an angry glance around at the family and friends surrounding me. As awful as it was, in some strange way, I took a strange pleasure in taunting the people who were tricking me. None of them knew how much I had figured out. I couldn't help but cast a particularly stern glance at my brother, Bob, and he visibly wilted under my gaze, realizing that the game was over. "So no one's going to come clean?" I asked them. "Do I have to tell everyone who it is?" Then I wondered, and it was a surprise when Bob's wife Pam jumped to her feet. "It's not what you think, Davy," she cried out in anguish. "It wasn't a sordid affair or anything like that. It was just love a few times to get Hilly pregnant. The whole family was desperate for a boy, especially the mother, and you didn't seem capable of fathering a child. Luckily, no one hit me with the proverbial feather at that moment, or I would have been knocked over for sure. As sure as eggs. She knew. She knew damn well. Pam knew about her husband, my brother, being the father of my daughter." I looked around the table and saw that it had split into two camps. Friends who didn't know, and family who, for the most part, seemed to know. As I stood there trying to come to my senses, the friends, one by one, got up, excused themselves, and embarrassedly walked away, leaving 17 or 18 of us, all family members. "Go play over there," said Julie, one of Hilly's sisters, and one by one the younger children were led out of the way. The teenagers were also asked to disappear, but it was like EastEnders, Coronation Street, and Neighbors all in one, and none of them budged. Fair enough. "You all knew very well, didn't you?" I exclaimed, looking around. "You all know about this fiasco, except maybe the kids." A couple of the husbands looked a little confused, but otherwise, there was no denying it. "Listen, Davy," my brother said. "It's not what it looks like, honestly." He wanted to add some other stupid comment, but my hate-filled stare silenced him. "So you all knew that Bob had made love to my loving wife and was Linda's father?" I demanded of those at the table. No one said yes, but then again, no one denied it either. "It was only 3 times, Davy," Pam spoke again. "Enough to get her pregnant?" "Whose idea was this?" I shouted out loud to them, my temper starting to flare. Again, no one said anything, but there were just too many eyes directed at Jen, my mother-in-law. I could have guessed it. "Thank you, Mom," I told her solemnly. "Your desperate desire to have a son in the family had cost me my marriage." "No!" Hilly shrieked, finally deciding to get involved. "Please don't say that, Davy. You can't say that. I couldn't live without you. Of course, you can only forgive me for one mistake." "One mistake?" I asked her. "Just one mistake?" "Of course, honey," Hilly sobbed. "It was just one time. It seems awful now, but when Mommy planned it all out years ago, it made sense." "What about Tom, then?" "Well, of course he's yours, Davy," she whimpered. "What do you mean?" "Wrong," I told her. "I've done a DNA test, and his father is the same man as Linda's father." The atmosphere at the table immediately changed. "What are you saying, Davy?" Pam exclaimed in surprise. "You heard me, Pam," I told her. "If my ever-loving brother is Linda's father, he is also Tom's father." Silence. This information was obviously new to everyone at the table, or at least most of them. "You're an asshole, Bob," Pam turned to her husband when the realization came. "You promised me. You promised me, and then you went and slept with that cheating bitch again?" Bob just put his head down, wishing he were somewhere else. "And you, stupid!" Pam yelled at Hilly. "I agreed to let you have my husband for just 1 week, and you continued to sleep with him?" With those words, she took 3 steps toward her sister and slapped Hilly across the face with all her might. "You cheating, stupid-eyed, blood-sucking cow!" she scolded Hilly, hitting her again and again, stopping and bursting into tears only when one of the others pulled her away from her little sister. "Lucky Mom, huh?" I spat out at Jen, but all she did was stare at me blankly. So who else was making love to my wife behind my back? I asked when no one else spoke, looking directly at Tim, who was sitting on the other side of the table from me. "You're an asshole," Julie shouted next to me. "That's what got me, too." So it's true what they told me that night, isn't it? You did sleep with her that night at the party. Hi, what's going on here? Julie was yelling at her husband, Ted, and he looked sheepish in denial. "And you, my dear sister," she yelled at my wife, "have you slept with all your brothers, you damn fool?" Well, she definitely slept with Tim, I added sincerely, really starting to enjoy the whole show. What? I didn't. Tim wasn't even a very good liar, nor was he very agile that evening, failing to dodge his wife Anne's fist when she punched him in the nose. "Don't come back to our house tonight," Anne yelled at her husband, "and in fact, don't ever come back." "That goes for you too," Pam spat at Bob. "I'm divorcing you and I never want to see you again." The three resentful sisters held hands and headed for the door. "You're not our sister!" they shouted in Hilly's face, lashing out. "Are you happy now, Jen?" I asked my mother-in-law, but her expression didn't change. She sat staring straight ahead while Hilly continued to sob in her arms. "I'm sorry, Davy," Alf, my father-in-law, finally cut in. "If I'd known—" He interrupted, at a loss for words, but he was the only one of these brutes who made any effort to apologize. Then Brother Bob walked around the table and came toward me, holding out his hands with an expression of utter shame on his face. "Davy!" he coughed. "Davy, what can I say?" "Nothing, asshole," I spat back, and without much force I swung at him, hitting him right in the chin. It might not have been much force, but the timing was perfect, and he stumbled backward, tripping over a chair and sprawled out on the floor, in no hurry to get up. I think it's safe to say that at that moment the party broke up. The fun seemed to have gone out of the whole evening. That evening, Hilly never came home, and in fact, except to pick up a few things, she never came home again. The children, for some time afterward, refused to speak to her. But as much as I hated her, I had to think of the long-term welfare of the children. Eventually, they came to their senses and accepted her back into their lives, but not in the same way. I was daddy, and well, I guess she became more like a favorite aunt. The whole family broke up, two of the three sisters who left that night divorced, and only Pam stayed with Bob, although she gave him a hell of a beating, deciding that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Pam came over a couple nights later when the kids weren't home, and it quickly became clear what was on her mind. Whether it was revenge for her or a desire to get back at me, I never found out, but I got my payback. There was no love, no compassion, and we just made love for hours on end. It was strange, just like making love with my wife, but different. Afterward, she thanked me and left, and I didn't find out until months later that she had made a habit of it, slowly going through Bob's buddies until she had slept with almost all of them. Would their marriage survive? I don't know, and I didn't care. Not my problem. But it must be a damn shame about the damn brother. 3 weeks later, one of the sisters, Anne, the pretty one, called me and invited me to dinner. I went, we ate, talked, romanticized, kissed, and eventually ended up in bed. But this time it was different. And after the initial passions, we made love, and it was again like my early days with Hilly. I don't know why Tim was neglecting his marriage, but it certainly had nothing to do with Anne's appetite. The sweetest pill was probably when Alf, the long-suffering husband of my former mother-in-law Jen, decided he'd had enough of her meddling, bought a 12-meter yacht, and spent the rest of his active life sailing around Europe. It came in handy. I, and sometimes the kids, spent a week or two sailing with him, and places like the south of France, La Rochelle, and the Canaries became familiar to us. Linda met and eventually married a young Spaniard she met while sailing, whose family owned perhaps the largest marina in Europe. That came in handy too. The two boys are still playing in the field, perhaps being cautioned against marrying too soon, as their father did. They've had their time, And me? I don't see Hilly, but the children tell me she lives day to day and often asks about me. The kids tell me, and I only grumble. Oh, and I'm thinking about trying for the perfect marriage again, but this time with Anne. I think we love each other, but we're both still a little wary. We'll see. I want to make sure I don't marry Anne just to mess with Hilly, but I'd love to see her face if that happened. The end!